Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most bizarre things have happened in the world of Pokemon. There was a big Nintendo leak that revealed lost Pokemon alongside original concept art of various Generation 3 Pokemon and some insane lore drops. And guys, if you like the Pokemon Typhlosion, you're not gonna like this. But before we get into that, I'm Zee. If you want a sequel to this video, get this to 3,000 likes, and also subscribe. Anyways, guys, Typhlosion, he's kind of getting cancelled right now, I gotta be honest. The leaks contain a story of Typhlosion kidnapping a girl, gaslighting her, and then making her give birth to a half-human, half-Pokemon child. So back in the early 2000s, they were trying to establish a little more lore having to do with Pokemon, and the theme here for this story was suggesting how a long time ago, when the boundary between Pokemon and humans were unclear, things got weird. In the story, this girl was invited to a cave by this guy who turns out to be the shapeshifter who can go from human to Typhlosion. This background information all kind of makes sense when you consider that Typhlosion is based off Mujina, otherwise known as the Japanese badger, who in Japanese folklore has the ability to shapeshift into humans. Now I must stress something, all the information I'm providing could be considered not canon, as it was not meant for the public eye, so for those who love Typhlosion, be well assured that this is not canon to the series, and that the real Typhlosion would not do this. Albeit to many, it still changes their perception of him, however. Anyways, let's talk about a Pokemon that's been lost, and that's been theorized for many years. This is a supposed Blaziken/Latias creature that has people thinking that this is actually an evolution for Delibird. Yeah, the Santa Claus Pokemon. Now, this hasn't been confirmed, and I don't really buy this theory as well. I just think they have the same coloring scheme. However, something that does suggest a potential Blaziken and Latias fusion was that on December 22nd, 2000, there was an original Pokemon Generation 3 proposal to add Pokemon fusions to the game. To quote one of the main proposals from the leak, there will be new ways to evolve Pokemon, including temporary fusions during battle using certain items that allow a Pokemon to merge or evolve for a limited number of turns. Additionally, gathering a certain number of specific Pokemon may cause them to evolve as a group, or some Pokemon may evolve only in specific locations. However, to burst all of your bubbles, Latias wasn't invented yet. This was actually the original design for Blaziken. It was supposed to fly, and from Blaziken, Latias was eventually invented, but no, this was not a Pokemon meant for that fusion concept. Something that I did find interesting is that, you know the Pokemon Metagross, the Steel Psychic type that's like super cool? Well, his early concept art is kind of horrifying. Just look at this, it's like as if it's like a dinosaur of some sorts. I mean, it definitely is a monster. However, people have been debating whether or not this was actually supposed to be Metagross. Perhaps it was another Pokemon entirely. The issue is that with most of these leaks, we're left to theorize rather than get an actual answer. Like for example, remember that Typhlosion story I was talking about a little bit ago? Well, there are more stories like that in the leaks that lead us to ask, why? One of the most disturbing stories found in the leak is this one right here, titled The Collapse of Culture and Relationships. To quote, "There was a time when the boundary between Pokemon and humans were blurred. In a coastal village, there was a man who one day was walking along the shore, found a female octillery washed up on the beach. The man had relations with the octillery and then threw it back into the sea. The next day, he went to the same spot and found the same octillery again. He once more had relations with it and threw it back into the sea as before. One night, after several days had passed, the man had a dream, and in that dream, the octillery spoke to him, stating, 'I cannot come to you, but I will deliver our child to you. It is our child, yours, and mine.' The next morning, the man went to the place where he had met the octillery, and there he found a boy. The man took the boy home and raised him. Time passed, the boy grew into a young man, and the father passed away." Yeah, what does this even add? Like, what are we doing here? I don't know, but at least the Pokemon leaks give us like the beta version of what Wooper used to look like. I mean, that's pretty cute. But in the same vein, we also get the beta version of Cacturne, which although cool, looks horrifying. There's a lot of crazy designs. It's like a lost character heaven. There's whatever this is, some sort of like technology-based Pokemon that has no face. We have the original 3 designs of the Generation 3 starters. Trico and Torchic look pretty similar to what they ended up being, but Mudkip ended up being something completely different. He was a bunny at first. And although I do like the original concept art for Mudkip, I do think the product we ended up getting was way more iconic, especially considering the meme that would spew from it, like in the year 2007. There are various Pokemon that never came to be. Like here we have Stumpy. It is a tree stump. Not the craziest thing in the world, but I would have liked this to exist. You have the original design of Shedinja, which looks like kind of like Paris. This is like a freaky looking thing with teeth. Seems very deadly. Anyways, let's talk about another freaking story. You know the cute Pokemon known as Slakoth? Well, it used to be that humans used to play cruel games where they would capture Slakoths, sometimes killing them for fun, gouging out their eyes and cutting off their ears. That's the exact quote from the lore. Hold up, the story gets way worse. One day, there was a woman walking alone in the forest, and saw a Slakoth hanging from the tree. She climbed the tree to catch it, but slipped and injured herself. At that moment, a Vigoroth appeared. The Vigoroth had a torn ear. The woman, startled, tried to flee, but her injured leg hurt too much, and she couldn't move. The Vigoroth, with the torn ear, suddenly attacked her when it saw her. The woman then lost consciousness. When she awoke, she was in an unfamiliar place. Before her lay a clear lake, surrounded by trees, from which many Slakoth and Vigoroth were hanging. All the Pokemon bore wounds somewhere on their bodies, marks left by the woman and her companions. Upon closer inspection, she noticed that some of the Slakoth hanging from the trees were corpses. They were the very Slakoth that the woman and her friends had killed and discarded. The Slakoth were throwing the corpses into the lake. Terrified, the woman tried to run away, but a Slaking appeared. This Slaking also had a torn ear. The woman realized that this was the same Vigoroth she had seen earlier, and fear overwhelmed her, causing her to faint once more. When the woman regained consciousness, she found herself at the entrance of the forest near her home, surrounded by her friends. They carried her back to her house. Sometime later, the woman gave birth to a child, but it wasn't a human child. It was a Slakoth. She intended to abandon it, but couldn't bring herself to do so. She stopped meeting with her friends and decided to raise the Slakoth. One day, her friends, concerned about her, visited the area near her home. They found the Slakoth sleeping there, the child of the woman. As they always did, they caught the Slakoth, stabbed it in the chest, and killed it. They took its corpses and head, and went to the woman's house. When she saw the slain Slakoth, the woman was overwhelmed by sorrow. She grabbed the Slakoth's body, and ran deep in the forest. The woman went to the lake she had been to earlier, and threw herself into the water, thus taking her own life. The implication of the story of how the woman was potentially assaulted by a Slaking is terrible. It's a completely unexpected story that has many Pokemon fans in shock. There is a reason for all of this. For my research, apparently old Japanese feudal stories would usually have these dark and tragic endings. I guess to teach kids not to kill innocent animals, or just in general not to mess with Mother Nature too much. To bring us back to a more lighter mood, we did get a bunch of Generation 3 leaked sprites, with a couple Pokemon that never ended up existing. There's like this Peacock Pokemon, which I think is pretty cool. I'm on so many original designs. It's very weird, you know. For over 20 years, we've been used to these original Generation 3 designs, and to see them in their prototypes is just so fascinating. Not only that, we also have this weird worm rock thing that never ended up materializing to anything. I think it's pretty cool, you think it's pretty cool, it should have been a thing. Not to mention this Deoxys beta form, I think? I'm not sure if this was one of Deoxys' many forms, or just the original design for Deoxys Prime, but I think it's super funny that it's a starfish. Speaking of alternate forms, we also have an alternate form of Rotom that was a toilet that never came to be. Game Freak, it would have been funny, come on. Of course, in between all these leaks coming out, there's some false information that's also going around. Like for example, I got super hyped up when I thought we finally got the leg version of Diglett, but no, it was fan art, and now I'm sad. Now let's go on a lightning round on the various major Generation 3 changes. First, let's go over Pelipper. Pelipper used to remind me of Donald Duck, like in Kingdom Hearts, like how he dresses. He looks very similar to it. I thought his original design looked pretty good, but I like the newer design a little more. Nuzleaf. Nuzleaf doesn't look like anything like his final form. He looks a little more like a ninja of sorts, and although cool, it's a little harder to distinguish him compared to his final counterpart. Next, we have a Pokemon who never made it to the final endgame. Boyato. He seems like an ice type, and I really like this guy's design. Reminds me of like the Abominable Snowman from that old Christmas special. Next, we have a Pokemon named Bai, who apparently was the original design for Wingull, and they look nothing alike at all. I feel like they opted in this like bug type Pokemon for a flying type Pokemon. We have a Pokemon here named Krobashi, who has a super cool design, but once again, he never ended up being in the final product. Next, we have the original form of Lombre, who had spiky hair. I like the final design a little more, but I do really like the C-Dot original design. He was like this big red ball with a helmet. Sableye was cool. He would carry around this giant jewel to hide behind so he wouldn't show you his face. Sharkpedo's original design looks very much like your typical in real life shark. I think it was for the best that they did make him a little more like a Pokemon. Claydol had a different color palette and had white eyes instead of red eyes, which I think made him creepier. Then we get the squid-type Pokemon named Taroka, and I think this design is like really sick. He has this white and red color palette alongside this red eye in the middle. Ah, it looks so cool. We have the original version of Shroomish, and holy shit, it's super cute. Kind of reminds me of like a Kirby character. We have a Pokemon here named Komari. I think this thing looks sick. I think he's supposed to be a vase of some sorts. We have this mermaid Pokemon named Airy, which I think is supposed to be a reference to Ariel of Little Mermaid. We have this giant frog named Kiromiro, and I absolutely love this design. This thing is so cool. I definitely think this giant frog would have been the fan favorite if this had ended up being in Ruby and Sapphire. Other Pokemon that I see here seems like things they would add in like later generations when it comes to the designs. Like something like Kodaman, which is this big black ball with curly hair. Seems like something more of like a Generation 8 or 9 Pokemon. Some seem like fake Pokemon you'd find on the internet. You know, like back in the days when they would like hype up like Generation 5 or Gen 6. We'd get these quote-unquote Pokemon leaks of fake Pokemon, and I see that when I look at the Pokemon Mosami, who's like a weird looking thing. I'm not even sure what it's supposed to be. Just a thing with like a green cap and a green body. We have the Pokemon Pen, who's like a chicken. Okay, that's pretty good. If we look at the original concept for Skitty looks like they were originally going to be a Digimon than an actual Pokemon, if that makes any sense. Want to know a crazy lore thing? So there was going to be this Pokemon named Zero Zoo, and that Pokemon was supposed to evolve to this Pokemon named Acheon, which was the original concept art for what ended up being Grovyle. And now we have one of my favorite cut Pokemon, El Doggy. Spanish for the doggy. We have the Pokemon Shabo, which is like this spicy golden rock that has this big old grin. It's pretty cool. We have Hakogame, who's this turtle Pokemon, but his shell is a gift. It's adorable. There's so many to list, dude. I would have to make a sequel to this video, but I will show you the artwork of cut Pokemon by the artist Ken Sugimori. So many cut out Pokemon, which I would argue that many of their designs still hold up pretty well. Now you may be wondering, why were all these Pokemon cut out? Well, who really knows? Perhaps Game Freak didn't think the designs were up to caliber. Maybe there was like a memory issue when it came to Ruby and Sapphire. It's a shame because I would have really liked to see a Pokemon like Panpamu, who's like a golden monkey, who's awesome. But that's just what happens when you game develop. A lot of things don't make it out of the cutting room floor. There's so many more leaks having to do with this that I could go on and on about. If you want to see a sequel to that, like this video. Subscribe, guys. See you soon.